Welcome to the Get Your Life series, where we delve into stories of resilience, hope, and transformation. I'm Galen, and today's episode is truly special as I am joined by someone very close to my heart, my husband, Mark Byrnside. This episode is not just about sharing a story, it's about sharing a journey through addiction, struggle, and ultimately triumph. Mark's story is one of courage, perseverance, and the power of redemption. In today's episode, we're going to take you on a deeply personal journey as Mark opens up about his battle with addiction, his relentless pursuit of sobriety, and the profound impact it has had on our lives. From the depths of despair to the heights of hope, this episode is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love and support. So join us as we dive into Mark's story, a story of breaking free from the chains of addiction, finding strength in vulnerability, and embracing a life of sobriety. This is Galen, and this is Mark's journey to sobriety. So with that being said, let's get started. So part one is the descent into addiction. So my baby, my husband, Mark, tell me about your early life and your background. And what I want to know is your upbringing and any factors that may have contributed to your eventual addiction.
Well, first of all, I'd have to say, I had really good parenting. I had a father who was always there, great provider. So I can't really blame anything on, poor parenting or anything like that. I just want to make that clear. What I remember was, my father was in the military. We moved around a lot. And that only compounded, I think, the issues I already had with being extremely shy, feeling out of place, feeling less than, very self-conscious. So even early on as a young boy, I felt kind of out of place. And that didn't get any better, honestly, for a long time until I actually did get sober. Just like a lot of people, there was broken marriages that affected me profoundly, and that wasn't anybody's fault, really. Sometimes things just don't work out, but I was that kid that would feel like I was to blame or I had some responsibility for my dad's marriage not working out. I remember feeling a lot of pressure with that. I just wanted my dad to be happy, And so I took on a lot of that guilt or something for some reason. I know that sounds ridiculous maybe to some people, but I remember that feeling. It's kind of weird, and we moved around. We moved around a lot. I was always the new kid in school, and that was very uncomfortable for, a young boy who was already painfully shy. I excelled in school academically, but socially I was awkward. It was difficult for me to make friends. I was mostly quiet, really, really shy.
Okay. So your path to addiction, was there anything that triggered you or influenced you to start going down the road of addiction? And what age roughly would you say that started?
I don't know that there were any real triggers other than the underlying issues that I already told you about. It's 16, 17. It started very innocently enough with cigarettes. I remember there was a big party at one of my high school classmates' house, a friend of mine, and I was invited. His parents were out of town, and this was the guy's house that you wanted to go hang out at because, he had satellite TV. So, when satellite TV was a big deal, he had the massive satellite dish out in the yard, and they had a pool. And I think I was 17, and he said, "Yeah, we're gonna get so and so's older brother to get us a case of Mad Dog 2020." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I was a little nervous about all this. I've never drank alcohol before, but these were my people. These were the people I were hanging out with. We were all metalheads, by the way. So we all had the Joe Dirt mullet and the heavy metal T-shirts and wore a lot of black. But good friends. They were good friends. They had no idea that further on down the road that I would become addicted to alcohol and drugs. So the party went off pretty well, I would say. This is what I'll share with you. So we'll condense it a little bit because there's a lot. But I remember getting the first tall glass of Mad Dog 2020 wine down, and I remember that feeling coming over me of, okay, I feel good. Everything is okay. The painful shyness and awkwardness began to just melt away. And that was only the first glass, and then I got another half a glass down, and then I really started to get, pretty inebriated. So long story short, I woke up in the recliner in my friend's living room, and, they were all passed out on the floor, and I began to look around the house and saw the damage that I had done. Because, of course, by that time, my friends were starting to rouse, and they were waiting. They were like, do you remember what you did last night? And I was like, no. So apparently I'd punched a bunch of holes in my friend's parents' wall of his house. I threw up all over the place. I got real dramatic, and they thought it was a good idea to put me on a waterbed to try to calm me down. And I just continued to vomit and tell them that I wanted to die like Jimi Hendrix. So that's how dramatic I was, So Jimmy died. Yeah, I don't know if y'all know any of the story about Jimi Hendrix, but, the autopsy report says he asphyxiated on his own vomit, I believe. But that was the beginning. The good part of it was I remember the feeling I got from the alcohol. So what had happened was I wanted to feel like that all the time. And so I chased that. I chased that feeling for the next 20 years.
So alcohol was first. What came after alcohol?
There was a lot of marijuana smoking. My sister by that time, who was 11 months younger than me, we won't name her name, but she was already doing that, so I thought that was okay. My sister's doing it, and she's younger than I am, and a lot of the friends I were hanging out with, they were experimenting with marijuana, didn't see a big deal. So there was a lot of that. I actually felt more comfortable around people who were twice my age. So I hung out with a lot of people who were like 35, 40 years old, and they were old hippies, and that was their thing, was to smoke some weed and drink some beer, and I fit right in with them. They didn't mind that, I tagged along with them, and it was pretty much socially acceptable for the most part in the crowd of people that I run with. Smoking a joint wasn't a big deal. The problem was I wanted to do it all the time, 24/7. When I woke up, before I went shopping, whatever, I wanted to be high all the time. So I could escape the feeling of feeling less than other people, the feeling of out of place, the awkwardness. I like the feeling that the alcohol and the marijuana gave me. So and then of course I was running with a cousin who was older than me, and he smoked a lot of marijuana too. So we did a lot of that together.
Did marijuana get you into doing other things? Was that a gateway to other stuff?
Well, believe it or not, that's a really good question, and I'd like to address that because there are a lot of people that would say that's bullshit, that marijuana is not a gateway drug. Well, let me tell you what happened. So one of my marijuana dealers actually lived right across the street from me, and I was getting marijuana from him. Obviously, he's and it was very convenient because he lived right across the street. Well, I went over there one time. I believe I was about 18 at this point. So this is how quickly the addiction with me progressed. It progressed rapidly. I went over to his house to get a bag of marijuana, and I noticed he kept coming in and out of the bathroom. He would go to the bathroom and he would be in there for several minutes, and then he would come back out. And finally, I just said, I'm sitting in the living room. I'm like, I'm going to go back there and see what the hell he's doing. So I go back there and look, the bathroom door's open. He's in there smoking crack cocaine. And I was like, oh, okay. I was kind of surprised by that. I didn't expect him to be smoking crack cocaine, but, he was pretty much like, hey, yeah, here, you want to try it? And I was like, sure, why not? My thought process was, I'm already smoking marijuana. That seems harmless. Alcohol seems harmless. I can't tell you why I made that huge leap from, basically recreational marijuana use to cocaine. I think it had a lot to do with my inner demons, the problems that I had, that I was trying to mask and self-medicate. And if any of y'all are familiar with what I'm talking about, it's a terrible feeling. And so I tried crack cocaine for the first time. And to be honest with you, I remember my first experience with that. I felt nothing really when I exhaled the smoke. As a matter of fact, I looked at the guy that had shared it with me, and I'm looking at him. I'm like, what's the big deal? I said, I don't feel anything, But I continued to go over to his house because he supplied marijuana for me, and continue to use crack cocaine with him. And then, eventually I was getting high off the crack cocaine, and very quickly became addicted to it, to the point where, I actually craved this drug and really wanted it. The feeling you get from crack cocaine is very intense. It's an intense feeling of euphoria that hits you almost instantly. It's not like ingesting the cocaine powder, intravenous needle use of cocaine. The moment you inhale the smoke from the solid form of crack cocaine and exhale the smoke, it instantly hits your brain, and you feel, I don't know how to explain it other than you feel really, really good. The problem with that drug is it's very fleeting, and the high only lasts for a few minutes, so you continuously chase that feeling.
So from crack cocaine, what was next after that?
Well, so one of the family members that I ran with a lot was a close cousin of mine, and we there was pill use. There was a lot of that. To be honest with you, it was mild muscle relaxers and stuff like that. And I don't really remember them doing a whole lot to me. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. I was using so many other drugs at the same time that, I don't, maybe it just wasn't having any effect on me. But we used to do these things called white crosses, which were like, you could basically buy them in a convenience store, and I think they were like a massive dose of caffeine and something else, and they would really hype you up. The real hardcore pill use would come later on in life when I was in my 20s and late 20s. I became pretty addicted pretty bad to painkillers, lower tab, Percocet. Those seem to be my prescription pills of choice. Really, really strong painkillers, and I wouldn't take one at a time. I'd take usually at least 3 at a time, 3 10-milligram lower tabs. And I don't know if any of y'all out there know how powerful them things are, but that was a pretty high dosage. And then I would function like that, though. I would go to work and feel good most of the day. By the time I'd get home, I would be wanting to take some more. I can't say I used a whole lot of nerve pills during my active addiction. There was some of that. I remember there was a particular episode where an ex of mine that was on again, off again, she had gave me some, I believe it was Klonopins, which are a really strong nerve pill, a benzo. and I had drank some alcohol on top of that, which is probably one of the worst things you can do, because I mean nerve pills are depressant, and so is alcohol. And what had happened was I remember making it home and crashing on my couch and passing out, and I woke up like 36 hours later, nearly 2 days asleep. And so my sister came and knocked on my door, and I thought it was Saturday because it was Friday night that I had taken the nerve pills and drank this beer, and it was, unbeknownst to me, it was Sunday morning. My sister was knocking on my door. I thought it was Saturday. So I remember telling her when I finally come to, I said, hey, sis, I said, what time does the race come on? Because the race always come on, NASCAR race come on Sunday, right? And she looked at me with this state of bewilderment, and she was like, Mark, it's Monday. Okay, so I made a mistake there. I think I actually took the drugs on Saturday and didn't wake up till Monday. That's what I meant. And she said, Mark, it's Monday. She said, the race was yesterday. And I said, oh my God, I've slept for like 2 days. It's a wonder that I didn't die then. So what you need to know about benzos in combination with alcohol, they can stop your respiratory system, folks. They shut down the central nervous system, and I'm very fortunate. I had, lots of episodes like that throughout a 20-year active drug addiction career where, there were blackouts and times probably when I should have died and I didn't. And the only thing I can tell you is why I'm still here is God had other plans for me and he wasn't done yet. So here I am.
So as a teenager, it started with cigarettes and then alcohol, then crack, then pills, uppers and downers, I imagine. And then what else came after that? Did anything else come after that?
Sure. In my late 20s, this was the first time I'd moved to North Carolina. A coworker of mine had handed me a little bag with some white powder in it. And I'm looking at him like, well, what is that? And he's like, it's cocaine. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he was like, go to the bathroom and check it out. Little did I know he was a drug dealer that was working in a restaurant, I guess is part of his cover. But not only that, just for extra income, I guess. But I remember going to the bathroom and it was all tied up in a little plastic bag and a little knot. And I was scared to open it because I was afraid I would spill it everywhere, So I remember putting it back in my pocket, and I went back into the kitchen because we were both cooks there. And I remember whispering to him, hey, man, I was scared to open it. I was afraid I was going to spill it. And I tried to hand it back to him discreetly. And he was like, no, you keep it. And I was like, wait a minute, dude. I don't have the money to pay for this. I was a new employee there, hadn't drawn a first paycheck yet. My first daughter had just been born at St. Joseph's Mission Hospital there in Asheville. And, I was a young father and really didn't have any money. So I definitely didn't want to be in debt to what, I was obviously figuring out was a drug dealer. Drug dealers can be very crafty, though. He knew exactly what he was doing. He told me, he said, no, you keep it and you pay me when you get paid. So he made it real easy for me to say yes. So basically what he did was in the drug world, we call that fronting. He give it to me on the front. And I was like, oh, okay, this is cool, And I remember my excitement when my then, at the time, mother of my children picked me up from work. And I was like, hey, look what I got, And her eyes got kind of big. Well, folks, that was my very first experience with cocaine powder. I'd never done it before. I'm already 29 years of age at this time, and I didn't think it was a big deal. I was already doing a bunch of other stuff, so I'm like, this can't hurt me, And did a couple of lines. I remember getting in the shower because we were going down to her mom's house. Her mom actually lived on the North Carolina-South Carolina line, so it was about a 30-minute ride back down the mountain to her mom's house. And I I remember that feeling of snorting them first couple of lines, and I felt really good. I felt like I could do anything. That's what the drug did to you. You felt like Superman, and a really intense feeling of euphoria. So we went down there, and I was still high. And little did I know that my then, we'll call her my mother-in-law, also liked the party. And so we did some of that with her. And from then, man, it was off to the races. It got to be, quite a regular thing. To the point that, really I was suffering some minor health issues. I was getting nosebleeds. My sinuses were always stopped up. It was difficult to breathe out of my nose. I very quickly got in debt with the drug dealer. Things of that nature. It also drew a lot of other unsavory characters, we'll call them, into my life that really had no business in my life, considering the fact that I had a young baby and, a relationship that I should have been nurturing and protecting and taking care of. It was a scary time, really.
And I think that this is because I'm starting to hear a shift now where you were realizing that maybe you shouldn't be doing this, which is probably a part of what led you into getting sober. So we're going to shift gears here in just a second. So shifting to part two, and we'll call part two struggles and setbacks. So what I want to know now is some of your attempts to get sober and why some of those previous attempts may have failed.
Well, first of all, let's talk about. I'll talk with you guys about periods of where I was dry, and for any of those who are familiar with recovery, you know what a dry drunk is, or a dry addict. But I had periods where I was dry, but it was usually due to lengthy incarceration periods, which really give me an opportunity to dry out and get all of the drugs and stuff out of my system. But I wasn't in true recovery. So of course I would get released from jail and or prison, whichever the case may be, and I would always go right back to what I knew, to cope with life's problems and the inner demons I had. I don't know if I would call those real attempts at getting sober. The first time I really tried, that I realized that alcohol was a huge problem. And we'll focus on that a little bit because I feel like alcohol was a catalyst, okay? Because I had began to notice a pattern that I wouldn't really mess with the hard drugs like cocaine and crack cocaine unless I'd already been drinking. It would usually start with alcohol, usually beer, because it was just cheaper and easier to obtain than liquor. You could buy beer just about anywhere. So it'd usually start with beer, and then of course I would have a paycheck in my pocket, and then I would go do some more, some crack cocaine or something like that. The first time I really tried to quit drinking and doing cocaine was what we call in the recovery world is the marijuana maintenance program. And I'll tell you why that failed. Now that worked, for about a year. I'd gotten into another serious relationship, and she and I had both decided that we would stop drinking. Because what had happened was there were a couple of incidents where she and I had both been drinking, and we got into some pretty violent fights. Well, maybe not so much violent, but really violent verbally anyway. To the point where I think we were both afraid that something bad was really going to happen. And so we made a pact that we would quit drinking, but we would continue to use marijuana. I thought marijuana was a good idea because I thought it would keep me calm, and that worked for about a year. But once again, that wasn't real recovery. I was still using a chemical substance, which is, THC in the marijuana, to self-medicate, to make me feel good. And it was also an expensive habit too, by the way. We should probably touch on that a little bit, because I was smoking a lot of marijuana. I mean, a quarter of an ounce would probably only last me a couple of days. So I was probably going through like an ounce of marijuana a week, just me alone. That's a lot. That's a lot. And it was an expensive habit. So that began to become a sore point with my then relationship. She's like, we can't afford this, and I was like, well, I got to have it. Eventually what happened was I had left work one day. I had gotten off early. They'd let me off early, and I had my paycheck. And for whatever reason, I decided I was going to go drink some alcohol. And she was still at work, and I knew she was. I knew what time she got off, and I thought, well, I could get away with it, And one thing led to another. I went, and got pretty lit up on some beer, and went down to the drug dealer's house and bought some crack. And that was the end of that relationship. She was not going to have that. I don't blame her to this day. So let me just tell you, any of y'all out there, you want to try the marijuana maintenance program because you got problems with harder substances or heroin or alcohol. It doesn't work. I don't believe it works. It didn't work for me. I still had the feelings of like I wasn't worthy. I was worthless. I didn't feel comfortable around other people. I felt inadequate. So to be honest with you, the drugs only perpetuated that feeling, because then I would use, and then I would feel even more like shit, because I'd be like, oh my God, I just spent my entire paycheck and now I can't even pay my rent. I can't even buy a hamburger, at McDonald's if I wanted to. That's how bad the addiction was. I would spend every dime I had, and and it was pretty obvious to the people around me that I had a problem, because they were like, didn't you just get paid yesterday? Why don't you have any money? And people were, they were starting to figure out, hey, Mark's spending all his money on drugs or something. And more people began to shy away from me. They didn't want anything to do with me because, I would steal, I would lie, I was dishonest. Even the people that loved me, they didn't really want, a whole lot to do with me, because I just couldn't be trusted, to be honest with you. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them one bit.
So when you realized that the marijuana road to recovery wasn't working for you and that had failed, what was your next big attempt at getting sober?
Well, that would take us, closer to the end of the story of my active addiction. I went on for many more years, believe it or not, drinking and using, and it was like a revolving door. It was like every day was Groundhog Day. I would wake up and it was just the same crap over and over. It never got any better. In fact, it only really got worse. I wound up in a little small town in Georgia called Claxton, and I'd just been released from prison for the second time. And I wound up doing a couple of years that time, and that was, you would think that would be a real eye-opener for most people. But once released from prison this second time, I went right back to doing what I knew to do best, and that was, to self-medicate. It was a lot of drinking alcohol, massive crack cocaine use. It was nothing for me to smoke $5, $6, $7, $800 worth of crack in one night if I had the money. And the breaking point came really where I was deeply in debt to some drug dealers, and these were the type of drug dealers that you didn't want to be in debt to because they would make you disappear. And I knew that, so I was not only afraid for my life about that, but I was also really afraid that I was going back to prison. I was on parole, so I was on parole supervision. I had a parole officer that was really doing everything he could to try to help me stay out of prison. And I will never forget this man. I don't know if I can mention his name on air.
Go ahead. This was a pivotal person in your life.
Yeah,
oh, yes.
His name is Buster Johnson.
Shout out to Buster Johnson.
Buster Johnson, I love you, man. You helped save my life. You were an instrument that God used to help save me. I truly believe that. This man would show up at my house, and there would be just a pyramid of beer cans on my dining room table, which, by the way, I was living in a little cheap, rundown 2-bedroom trailer, and so I was not living the best lifestyle. And he would be like, you got all these beer cans. You got any more of that left? You're not supposed to be drinking alcohol. And I'd be like, nope, I drank it all. And this man had plenty of opportunity to say, hey, Mark, you're violating the conditions and rules of your parole. I've got to arrest you and put you back in prison. But he didn't do that. Little did he know there were crack pipes stashed up under my couch and things of that nature that he did not see. This went on for another week or two, and finally I had reached out to him because, of course, I had his phone number. I had a direct phone number to his cell phone, and I called him, and I said, man, I need some help. I was desperate. I was so desperate. I knew that if I didn't stop, I was going to die. So it was a moment of clarity. It's like the fog lifted, and I'm like, okay, I have to do something. I have to make an attempt to get sober, or I'm going to die, or I'm going back to prison. And neither one of those two choices sounded like good ones to me. And he answers the phone, and I said, I need some help. And, he was very matter of fact. Old country boy, I love him. Straight to the point. He's like, well, why do you need help? I said, because I can't stop doing drugs, man. I said, I've tried. I said, I can't stop doing crack cocaine. I can't stop drinking. And he said, okay. He said, why do you want to quit? Another simple question, very straightforward and direct. And I said, because I don't want to die. Just like that. I remember telling that. I don't want to die. I'm not ready to die, and I don't want to go back to prison. And he said, okay. And there was some other stuff that happened in between there, and I won't tell you, a lot of the details of that. I kind of took the long road to recovery, but he wound up picking me up in Hinesville, Georgia, which is about 45 minutes away from Savannah, Georgia. And he picked me up at a little gas station there. It was just a little bus stop. And he put me in jail. He arrested me. He said, Mark, I got no choice but to arrest you and put you in Liberty County Jail here in Hinesville, Georgia. He said, because you're basically homeless and you've got nowhere else to go. And he said, conditions of your parole is that you have an address and somewhere to live. And at this point, I was willing to do whatever I had to do. And I said, okay, that's fine. I said, let's do what we got to do. He took me to the jail. Of course, they drug tested me, and I tested positive for marijuana and cocaine. And he said, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to stay here and be housed with the other inmates until all the drugs come out of your system before I can get you into a rehab. He said, a rehab will not take you if you still have drugs and alcohol in your system. You at least need to be clean. I said, okay. 34 days I sat in Liberty County Jail in Hinesville before I tested clean from the marijuana. And the day I tested clean, he took me out. He took me to a recovery place in Savannah, Georgia. I'll never forget this place. And he put me in there as a student of their program, and that worked for about 6 months. What I will mention is it wasn't a 12-step program, so this was another attempt at getting sober. This wasn't a 12-step program. It was more of a faith-based program where, and I don't knock any programs, folks. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying it didn't work for me. I'm not saying it doesn't work for you or for other people. My attempt at this particular type of program failed, and a lot of the failure is mine. But their belief was that, getting closer to God and, following what the Bible says would cure you of your addiction, and, you won't use anymore. And that worked, like I said, that worked for about 6 months. But then the program began to give me a little more freedom, where I was able to leave the actual property. I had a little job outside of the building, and I had no direct supervision. There wasn't anybody watching me, and I drank and used again.
So we're heading towards, I imagine, what your rock bottom moment is. Or would you consider the fear of going back to jail, or dying being, you're trying to prevent the rock bottom moment?
You know what? That's a good question. So I would say I had multiple rock bottoms. One was calling the parole officer and saying, "Hey, I need some help. I don't want to die." That was the beginning. So I exited the faith-based program out of guilt, really, because I had been caught red-handed drinking alcohol again. I was blind drunk, high as a kite on marijuana, and it was pretty obvious to the staff that I was under the influence. Little did I know they were going to give me a second chance, and they were not going to kick me out of the program. But I didn't stick around to find out. The moment they got me back to the building, I grabbed a couple of clothes and threw them in a bag, and I think I borrowed $20 from a friend of mine who was also in the program, and I left. And that night, I went and drank some more alcohol and smoked some more crack cocaine, and I slept on the steps of a church right there on Bull Street in Savannah, Georgia. And it was cold that night, folks. I will never forget that. I nearly froze to death. It was it had to have been, it was wintertime. It was the dead of winter. Lucky for me, it was one of the milder temperature nights, so I didn't freeze to death. So this second rock bottom was, I got up the next morning and I was walking down the sidewalk on Bull Street, and I bumped into a couple of guys that I knew that were in another program called Men's Residential and Recovery Place in Savannah, Georgia. This program is on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and it's still there today. It's actually grown some, and they're still helping a lot of people. I bumped into these guys, and they were like, "Holy hell, Mark, you look like you know what?" And I could barely speak. I was like, "Yeah," and they were like, "Well, what happened?" I'm like, "Well, isn't it obvious? I used again. I got drunk last night, and I did some cocaine." And they were like, "Come with us." They almost literally took me by the hand and took me across the street on Bull Street to this building. And it was, trying to remember the name of that organization. Anyway, it was part of the Recovery Place program. And there were counselors in there, and they took me in there, and they said, "You need to go." My friend said, you need to go in there and talk to these people. And I sat down with this guy named Ronnie, and he interviewed me. And he said, "Yeah, I believe you need some help." And I was like, "Definitely." And I told him, a little bit about my story. I told him I was still on parole with the state of Georgia, and I was a crack cocaine addict and alcohol. And I said, "I need some help. What can you do? What kind of program can I get in here to at least, make a good attempt at getting sober?" And he enrolled me in recovery treatment classes in a place in Savannah. And so basically what I had to do, folks, was I had to live in a homeless shelter, and every day this van would come by with a staff member driving it, and they would pick me and some other guys up, and females too, and they would take us to this building, and I would sit in class and learn about my addiction and how to recover and how to get sober and treatment for, what is the main cause of, me using alcohol and drugs, and get to the root of the problem. And I did that for, gosh, I think it was 60 days. In the meantime, I got on the waiting list to get into the men's residential recovery program, which is kind of like a halfway house, if you will. A really nice apartments there. You live in an apartment with about 5 or 6 other men. You still continue to go to treatment classes for recovery every day. They drug test you randomly and frequently. You have a sheet that you have to get signed saying you attended a 12-step program meeting, which I was doing.
Good. This sounds like this is your part of you getting sober and maintaining your sobriety, which is going to be our part 3, Road to Recovery. But we're going to take just a quick second so he can rest his voice here, take a little drink, and we'll be right back. Okay, so now that we're back, we're going to continue on with the road to recovery and getting sober. You have definitely mentioned some treatment programs, but I would like to hear a little bit more about some of those treatment programs, some of your support systems, and some strategies that were instrumental in your road to recovery.
Wow, this is the best part of the story, in my opinion. I was starting to learn, for one. I was starting to learn that I didn't know everything. I didn't know what was best for Mark. I had obviously tried everything I could to stop using drugs and alcohol and failed. This residential treatment program was really the beginning for me. Men's Residential, Savannah, Georgia, MLK Junior Boulevard. It's also under the Recovery Place umbrella. They have treatment classes in Savannah for men and women. So they've expanded the program now where there are single mothers. There are women there with children, and they have really nice housing for recovering alcoholics and addicts there. Beautiful apartments, clean, well maintained, a lot of rules in place that I recognized very quickly were there just to help me. There was a curfew there. Because if you think about it, folks, if you're out past 11, 12 o'clock at night on the streets of Savannah, you're probably up to no good. You're not going to find anything good out there, other than some drugs and some alcohol and whatever prostitution, whatever your deal is. And I actually liked the fact that they drug tested me frequently. I embraced sobriety and recovery. I began to feel some real hope that this was going to work. For me, this was the last resort. This was either going to work or it was going to fail. And if I knew if it failed, I would go on to the bitter end and I would just wind up drinking myself to death or overdosing. I would die by some means that would involve drugs and alcohol and or prison or something. So I gave it everything I had. I finally shut the fuck up for a minute and listened to what somebody was trying to tell me who had my best interest at heart. And it was actually really easy, to be honest with you. We call it dumbing down. I dumbed down. I stopped thinking. I stopped trying to figure out solutions how to drink successfully, which, I say that with, some humor because it's an absolutely ridiculous concept. Controlled drinking for an alcoholic does not work. I had tried that. The world began to open up for me, really. It began to look beautiful. I started noticing the simplest of things, like the birds chirping, and I know that sounds kind of corny and, whatever, but this is true. The sun was bright. I began to feel like, okay, I'm going to be okay. This is going to work. I was starting to feel better about myself. What I did was, at this halfway house, at this residential treatment facility, they encourage you to get an AA sponsor. Excuse me, an AA sponsor. Okay, so this will be the first time that I actually mention Alcoholics Anonymous. Some people might have a problem with that. It's supposed to be anonymous. I won't mention anybody else in the program's name, but I think it's important to mention that that's the program that helped me get sober. It worked for me. So eventually I summoned the courage to ask a guy after an AA meeting was over. I approached him and I said, will you help me? So an AA sponsor is like a guide. This man's already been sober for X amount of 24-hour periods. He's worked this program one day at a time. And obviously it was successful for him because I'm looking at the guy and, he's well kept, clean shaven, well dressed, very poised. But at the same time, he was quiet like me and seemed a bit reserved and maybe a little shy. So we seemed to have similar personalities, but like I said, it was obvious to me that he was sober because the guy, he looked pretty well put together. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask this guy. Why I asked this guy, I guess, was for the reasons I just shared with you. He reminded me of me, and he agreed to help me. And the instructions were very, very simple. Call me every day, Mark. I want you to read this chapter in the big book. I want you to go to an AA meeting every day, at least one every day. The first chapter he had me read in the AA Big Book was The Doctor's Opinion, and that one is critical. There's a reason why AA sponsors have you read that chapter first, because it is chock full of information that's just it's going to open your eyes, and you're going to read that, and at least this is what happened for me. I read that, and I was like, oh my God, this chapter is talking about me. This is, this guy is me. I've got all of these problems and these symptoms of alcoholism. And the doctor, it's written by an actual doctor, by the way, and the doctor pretty much states in that chapter that the only thing, because he's treating a guy for alcoholism, and he tells this guy that, the only known thing that's ever really worked to treat alcoholism, is a spiritual program. And it was still in its infancy at that time, Alcoholics Anonymous. It was still relatively new and was kind of a secret society, if you will. Not really, but it was working for people. The doctor knew this. The doctor knew about this program, and there had already been hundreds of people who had recovered from alcoholism and drug addiction by working this 12-step program in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I was like, okay, if it can work for these people 100 years ago, and it's still working for people today, then why can't it work for me? If I just do the simplest of things, if I stop trying to run my own life and make all these poor decisions because my brain is clouded from the drugs and alcohol, why don't I let these people instruct me what to do for a while, give it a shot, and see what happens?
And has that mindset helped you maintain your sobriety? And first, I just want you to say how long it has been since you have been sober.
My sobriety date is January 2nd, 2012. So I'm going into my 13th year of recovery, and um, don't get caught up in that number though. I think it's important not to get caught up in that number, because I truly believe the Alcoholics Anonymous motto is you work the program one day at a time. So that's the simplest, easiest way to work it. Stay sober today, give it a chance today. Don't drink or use drugs today. Tomorrow will take care of itself, and tomorrow will come, God willing. We'll all rise again, and we'll get another opportunity to stay sober and not drink or use, and help somebody along the way. And that really has still been to this day a big part of my recovery program. I am now in a better position to help people. And I tell you, folks, a lot of times it's just complete strangers. I won't toot my own horn, but it's just simple acts of kindness. It's helping family. It's helping aunts on my husband's side. It's helping my children. These are the things that get me high today and make me feel good.
And would you say that is some daily practices that help maintain your sobriety?
Certainly. And for the person that says, well, the opportunity doesn't present itself every day, I say that's not true. I feel like there's at least even the smallest, simplest opportunity every day to be kind or to help someone. It's not hard. It doesn't cost you anything, really, most of the time. Sharing my story with other alcoholics has been a big part of me staying sober and helping other people too. So it kind of works both ways. By me telling people my story and how the program helped me get sober is helping me, and it's helping them too. Maybe it's planting a seed. Let's hope it does. It did for me. That's how I picked my AA sponsor. I listened to this man in several meetings before I actually asked him to help me. So he was not that guy that sat in an AA meeting over and over again and never shared and opened his mouth and was vocal. He knew it was important that he share, little bits and pieces of his story, so somebody like me would hear it and say, hey, that worked for him. Let me talk to this guy and pick his brain a little bit. Maybe he can help me recover. And that's exactly what happened. I tried to follow the simple instructions as best I could. I called the guy virtually every day. A lot of times he didn't answer the phone, but I would leave a voicemail and say, sometimes I would just say, hey man, I didn't drink or use today. Thank you. And I would hang up the phone. If I had a real emergency, I would leave him a voicemail if he didn't answer the phone, and he would call me back. But I also had developed a network too. That's important to mention. There were some other men in the program that were just like me, that had been sober about the same amount of time I had. So that made me feel comfortable. I didn't feel like I was alone. And I would talk with them. I would share things with them. I would share my problems with them. Hey, man, this is what I got going on. And he would be like, well, have you thought about this? And I'd be like, damn, man, I didn't think about that. I believe that'll work,
And that's good, having a network like that.
Oh,
which is going to bring us to the final section and the conclusion, and we're going to wrap things up. But part 4 will be empowerment and inspiration. And so what that section is going to be about is you speaking directly to someone out there who may be listening to this podcast, who may be facing similar challenges that you went through and needs advice and needs encouragement to continue to go forward. So what I want to know is, what would you say to someone that's listening to this podcast that needs to hear something like that?
this is what I got to say to anybody out there who's suffering from alcoholism and addiction. There is hope. That is the strongest weapon we have against this disease. And make no mistake about it, it is a disease. It's been classified by the CDC of the federal government as a disease. It can be treated. The hope is a 12-step based program of recovery. Okay. It's really just that simple. Follow the instructions. This was mapped out for us over 100 years ago, and it hasn't really changed. It hasn't needed to change or be revised because it works. It's a recipe for success. Sobriety has to become the number one priority in an alcoholic and addict's life. Without that, there is no hope. Okay, it's always going to be the same thing. Eventually, you're going to wake up one day, and your life's going to be passed you by. And it nearly did me, by the way. I was almost 40 before I got sober. And I don't really regret that. It took what it took for me to learn this valuable lesson that I tried to play God for most of my life, and that just didn't work. I had to allow God to take over control of my life. And the 12-step program will lead you in that direction. And it doesn't necessarily have to be what we call God, in AA, we like to use the term higher power, whatever it is, whatever you believe. So we don't, I want to make sure that we're clear about it. It's not a Christian program, folks. It's not any faith or religion, really. It's not Baptist. It's not Pentecostal. It's just believing that there's a power greater than yourself out there that's going to help lead you into recovery, keep you there, take care of you, have faith in that power that everything's going to be okay. And so far it's worked for me for, well, gosh, how many 24-hour periods has it been? There's 364 days in a year, and I'm going into year 13. So you do the math, and that's 24-hour increments, that I work the program, and I still am. I'm still in touch with people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I still have a network. I still have people, kind of like the president has its cabinet, right? He has his cabinet of advisors, that he helps him make decisions. It's almost the same thing. I do that. I have you. I bounce ideas off of you. Other people that have been sober for a period of time, I talk to them. Because nobody's going to understand an alcoholic like another alcoholic, okay? They're going to understand exactly what you're feeling and what you're talking about when you come to them with a problem. And more often than not, what I found is they had a solution, or they'd already been through that experience before, and they can tell me what worked for them and what didn't work for them. It's a vast network of wisdom and knowledge that it's publicly accessible. It's there. AA has a hotline that you can call. I'm not sure what the number is, but
I'll make sure that we have it added into the transcript.
It's with today's technology, folks, and laptops and desktop computers and smartphones, it's easy for you to find that number. It's easy for you to find AA groups that are close by you. And I guarantee you, if you reach out to one of these groups, even if you don't have a way to get to the meeting, they will send somebody to pick you up and take you to the AA meeting. So saying I don't have any transportation is just not an excuse. We don't have excuses in Alcoholics Anonymous. You get to the meeting, you work the program, you get sober, you help somebody else.
Well, there you have it, folks. I would like to thank everyone for listening to this wonderful podcast. We have some wonderful resources and some support groups out there in Charlotte, in Savannah, Georgia, no matter what state you're in. I'm sure that there's resources out there for you. Please feel free to look them up. And we're going to go to our closing remarks. As we come to the end of this episode, I am filled with gratitude for the opportunity to share Mark's journey with all of you. His story is a reminder that no matter how dark the road may seem, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow. To anyone listening who may be struggling with addiction, know that you are not alone. There is help available. There is hope out for a better future. Take the first step, reach out, and know that healing is possible. Mark's journey to sobriety has taught us that through determination, support, and love, we can overcome even the greatest of challenges. And as we navigate our own paths, may we find strength in his story and the stories of countless others who have walked this road before us. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to Mark for sharing your truth so openly and honestly. Together, may we continue to uplift, inspire, and support one another on the journey to healing and wholeness. This is Galen with the Get Your Life podcast, signing off with the message of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Until next time, take care and stay strong.